the peak, and the poison. The view from the penthouse office was a monument to their success, a shimmering canvas of the San Francisco skyline that stretched all the way to the Bay Bridge. But to Mark, standing alone by a glass railing with a sweating plastic cup of lukewarm beer, it was just a lot. A lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of pressure. He was a man built for the quiet hum of servers and the elegant logic of a well-written line of code, not for the cacophony of a victory party. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination of everything. The launch of the Phoenix 2.0 operating system had been flawless, a technological triumph that had been met with near-universal acclaim. The initial public offering had been an even bigger success, turning the company they'd started in a cramped apartment into a multi-billion-dollar entity overnight. Mark had built the engine, the intricate architecture that made it all run, but he felt like he was just a ghost at his own party, a stranger in a suit that felt 2 sizes too small. He scanned the room, his eyes automatically tracing the familiar lines of the office. The server racks, once tucked away in a corner, were now a sleek, minimalist art installation. The whiteboards, once crammed with his frantic scribbles, were pristine and blank. It was all so clean, so polished, so unlike him. Then he saw him, the nucleus of the party. Jason moved through the crowd like a king holding court. He was all charisma and flash, a 6'2" magnet in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Mark's first car. Jason's laugh was loud and genuine as he clapped an investor on the back, a practiced, confident rumble that drew smiles from everyone around him. He didn't just talk to people, he captivated them. He was the reason Phoenix Tech had gone from a brilliant idea to a corporate powerhouse. Jason was the face. Mark was the soul. Mark watched as Jason caught sight of him, a flash of genuine affection lighting up his eyes as he broke away from a huddle of venture capitalists. He navigated the sea of people with an ease Mark could only dream of. Conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a low, intense murmur. And now we're on top of the world. But we can't get complacent. This is just the beginning. I've been talking to the guys from Omnicorp. They're impressed. Very impressed. A cold knot formed in Mark's stomach. He'd heard the name Omnicorp before, a tech monolith notorious for swallowing up smaller, innovative companies. He didn't like the sound of it. Omnicorp? Why? We don't need a partner. Phoenix is self-sustaining now. The user base is growing. The code is solid. Exactly, Jason cut him off, his voice rising with a practiced enthusiasm. It's so solid that it's got major players eyeing us. And you know what that means? Leverage. We can either stand pat and get picked apart by the competition, or we can make a strategic play. We can get in front of this thing and call the shots. Mark's gaze flickered from the opulent room back to Jason's face. He saw the glint in his eyes, not of shared triumph, but of pure, unadulterated ambition. It was a look Mark had seen before. Every time Jason talked about expansion, about acquisitions, about what he called unlocking shareholder value. Mark's mind was a fortress of logic and data, and something about this conversation didn't compute. But what about the integrity of the system? Mark pressed, his voice strained. We promised our users that their data would be safe, that this was about innovation, not just a cash grab. I built it for a purpose, not to be a pawn in some corporate chess game. Jason's smile vanished for the briefest moment, his eyes hardening into chips of ice. But just as quickly, The easy charm returned. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on Mark's shoulder, his gaze earnest. Hey, look at me. Mark reluctantly met his eyes. It's you and me, man. That's all that matters. You really think I'd ever let anyone compromise what we built? This is our legacy. I'm just looking out for our future. You trust me, right? The question. A city of millions hummed with life, completely unaware of the poison that had just been administered. A subtle dose of pure trust that would one day turn to ash in a fire of betrayal. The stab in the back. The morning sun filtered through the high-rise windows cast long golden streaks across the polished concrete floor of the Phoenix Tech office. Mark stepped off the elevator, a small, weary smile on his face. The building hummed with a different kind of energy today. A quiet, focused confidence that had replaced the celebratory din of the night before. This was his world, the one he had painstakingly built from an idea and countless lines of code. For the first time, the suit didn't feel so alien. He felt like he belonged. He nodded to a few developers huddled around a whiteboard, their excited chatter about the 2.0 system a symphony to his ears. The feeling was a profound sense of ownership and pride, a reward more satisfying than any financial gain. He settled into his chair, the familiar click of his keyboard a comforting sound, ready to dive back into the code that was the very heartbeat of his creation. A message popped up on his monitor, a clean, sterile notification from Jason's assistant. Urgent meeting, conference room B, now. The formality was jarring. Jason usually just walked over to his desk or shot him a quick text. Mark's small feeling of unease was quickly dismissed. It was probably just another impromptu strategy session. He pushed away from his desk, a bit annoyed by the interruption, and headed down the hall. Conference room B felt like a different universe. The room was stark, all white walls and sterile chrome furniture. The air was thin, carrying the faint, clinical smell of disinfectant. Jason was already there, but he wasn't alone. A man in a tailored, anonymous gray suit sat across from him, his face impassive, his briefcase resting on the table like a tombstone. Mark's unease intensified. He recognized the man from the company's legal department, a corporate shark named Mr. Anderson. This wasn't a strategy.
What are you talking about? Mark stammered, his mind reeling. Strategic acquisition? We're not getting acquired. We talked about this last night, Jason.
Mr. Anderson slid a folder across the table.
All the details are here, Mr. Peterson. The transaction was finalized at 11:59 last night. Under Section 7.2b of your initial operating agreement, a vote of the two founding partners was not required for the sale of shares provided the transaction was initiated and signed off by the majority shareholder. Mr. Harris has a majority stake, as of the restructured ownership documents filed 6 months ago. Mark's hand trembled as he opened the folder. He saw the legal jargon, the bolded clauses, and the numbers. His brain, a machine built for logical analysis, tried to process the information. But it was all wrong. The percentages, the signatures, the dates. 6 months ago. All of it had been done in the shadows. His mind flashed back to a document he had signed months before, a mundane-looking legal update that Jason had told him was just a formality for a new round of seed funding. He had trusted him. He had signed it without a second thought. His gaze snapped to Jason. You tricked me,
he whispered, the words choked with disbelief.
You changed the documents. You made me sign away my own company.
The betrayal felt so profound, so absolute, it was almost physically painful. Jason finally looked at him, his face a chilling portrait of corporate indifference.
Don't be so dramatic, Mark. It was the only logical play. You were getting sentimental about the technology, about the vision. This company was never going to grow to its full potential with you at the helm. You're a builder, not a leader. We had to move fast. It was in the company's best interest. The words, so casually delivered, were a final cutting insult. Mark felt the confusion and shock give way to a white-hot fury. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The company's best interest? Or yours, Jason? You took everything. The company, my work, my shares, everything. Jason didn't flinch. He simply nodded toward the door. Mr. Anderson, the human equivalent of a legal robot, made a call. Within moments, 2 large, imposing security guards entered.
Confusion and curiosity were a final, humiliating punctuation to his public downfall. At the front desk, a small cardboard box sat on the counter. His entire life's work, distilled into a few books, a coffee mug, and a handful of personal items. He clutched the box to his chest, the cardboard a flimsy barrier against the weight of his defeat. He stepped out onto the street, the sounds of the city an assault on his raw nerves. He looked up at the skyscraper, a monument to a dream that had turned into a nightmare. The Phoenix Tech logo, a bird rising triumphantly from the flames, seemed to mock him. The world he had built was still there, vibrant and alive, but he was no longer a part of it. He was nothing but a ghost, holding a box of memories, cast out and left to burn in the ashes of his own creation. Met a life in ruins. The world outside Mark's window was a vibrant, sprawling canvas of American suburbia, but he saw none of it. Sunlight, sharp and indifferent, cut through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air of his one-bedroom apartment. The space was a monument to his despair, a mattress on the floor, a half-eaten box of pizza, and the faint, stale smell of a life left to decay. He hadn't cleaned in months. The cardboard box of his old life, the one the security guard had handed him, still sat unopened by the door, a tombstone for a past he couldn't bear to look at. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of waking up late, staring at the grimy ceiling and the grim ritual of his new obsession. It wasn't a healthy hobby. It was a self-inflicted punishment. Every morning he'd roll over, grab his laptop, and type 3 words into the search bar. Jason Harris, Phoenix Tech. The results were a constant, agonizing loop of success he was no longer a part of. The screen showed Jason at lavish corporate galas, his arm around a supermodel he'd once called a friend, his smile blindingly white. There were news articles with headlines like, Phoenix Tech thriving under new Omnicorp leadership, and Jason Harris half watching a financial news channel, the talking heads a distant, meaningless buzz. He was about to close the lid and retreat into the numbing darkness of sleep when a familiar face appeared on the screen. It was Jason. He was standing on a rooftop terrace in what was now the new Omnicorp headquarters, the San Francisco skyline a glittering backdrop just like at their party. The reporter, a young woman with a perfectly coiffed haircut, was asking him about the company's recent growth. "And what do you have to say to the critics, Mr. Harris, who argue that this success came at the expense of your original co-founder, Mark Peterson?" she asked, her voice a practiced mix of deference and journalistic curiosity. Mark froze. He sat up, the laptop almost sliding off his lap, his heart thumping in his ears. This was it. A direct question. What would Jason say? Would he show an ounce of remorse? A flicker of regret? Jason laughed. Not his booming, genuine laugh, but a short, practiced, dismissive chuckle. Mark's a brilliant guy, a true artist. But let's be honest, He was an artist with a paintbrush in a world of architects. He had the vision for a great product, but not a great company. He paused, looking directly into the camera, a flicker of something cold in his eyes. In business, sometimes you have to make hard choices. You have to cut off a dead limb to save the body. The words hung in the air, a final, brutal judgment. A dead limb. Jason was calling him a useless, rotting appendage, a part of the past that had to be severed for the sake of progress. The utter arrogance, the casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. And something shifted in Mark. It wasn't a sudden, violent outburst of anger. It was something far deeper, far colder. The heavy blanket of depression, which had suffocated him for months, simply lifted. In its place, a stillness descended, a terrifying clarity. The weariness was gone. The apathy was gone. The grief was gone. All that remained was a single, pure thought, as crystalline and sharp as a shard of glass. Of a textbook on cybersecurity. He took out the book, its pages dog-eared and familiar. The dust from the box settled around him, but he barely noticed. For the first time in months, Mark wasn't looking at the past. He was building the future. A future of vengeance, meticulously crafted, line by line, just like the code he used to write. Combating. The cleansing began not with a roar of fury, but with the quiet, methodical precision of a man tidying a grave. Mark started with the apartment. He moved with a new, chilling purpose, gathering the scattered remnants of his depression. The empty pizza boxes, the soda cans, the crumpled takeout menus, and systematically consigning them to the trash. He scrubbed the grime from the sink, dusted the shelves, and folded the clothes that had lain for months in a heap on the floor. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was a ritual, a symbolic shedding of the old defeated self. He was shedding the skin of Mark Peterson, the trusting co-founder, and preparing to become something else entirely. His transformation was a silent one, a process that began in the dark corners of his mind and slowly manifested in the physical world. He sold his watch, his last expensive possession, for a few $100s. He closed his bank account, cashing out the meager remnants of his severance pay. Every financial link, every digital footprint that could lead back to the Mark Peterson of Phoenix Tech had to be erased. He was going to become a ghost, and ghosts, by their very nature, leave no trail. His next destination was not the lavish streets of downtown San Francisco, but a nondescript suburban electronics store. The kind of place where the fluorescent lighting hummed and the salespeople were more interested in their phones than in customers. He paid in cash, every transaction a new layer of anonymity. He purchased a cheap, unremarkable laptop with a blank operating system, an external hard drive, and a small, powerful, solid-state drive. He also bought a handful of networking components, a new router, a few Ethernet cables, and a specialized piece of hardware for routing a secure connection. Back in his apartment, the transfer external drive, he created a new isolated partition, a digital vault he christened the Dark Archive. This was where the real work would begin. His mind, once a tempest of pain and anger, was now a cold, efficient machine. He wasn't thinking about emotion. He was thinking about logic. The betrayal wasn't a personal affront. It was a security breach. Jason wasn't a friend. He was a target. The company he once built was no longer a symbol of his pride, but a vulnerable system, a complex network of flaws that he, and only he, knew how to exploit. He sat cross-legged on the floor, the glow of his screen illuminating a face that was no longer kind or trusting, but focused and predatory. He opened a simple text document and began to list his assets. His greatest asset wasn't money or a fancy degree. It was his unparalleled knowledge. He knew Phoenix Tech's network like the back of his hand. He knew the specific vulnerabilities in the code, the security loopholes that no one else was aware of. He remembered every password protocol, every backdoor he had built to test the system's integrity, backdoors that were never closed. Mark was no longer an engineer. He was an architect of ruin. He wasn't looking to destroy the company. That would be too simple. He was going to build a case against Jason, line by line, fact by fact, with the same meticulous attention to detail he once used to create his code. He would use Jason's own ambition, his own hubris, against him. The plan was not to burn down the building, but to prove that the foundation was built on lies, and that its architect was a fraud. He stared at the blank screen, his fingers poised over the keyboard. For months, he had been a man without a purpose, a vessel for emptiness. Now he had one. It was a dark, terrifying purpose, but it was his. He began to type, the clicking of the keys a faint, steady rhythm in the silence of the room. The first line of code in his new life had just been written. First contact, direct product of his cold, new mindset. He would not use brute force or flashy hacking tools. He would use knowledge, the intimate, visceral knowledge of the system's skeleton that only a creator could possess. He started with a series of reconnaissance pings, a digital sonar to map the network's exterior. He routed his connection through a series of anonymous proxies and encrypted servers, making sure his digital fingerprint was a scrambled, untraceable mess. The terminal on his screen filled with lines of code, a language only he understood, as he searched for the digital echo of the old Phoenix Tech system. He was a blind man, feeling for a familiar object in a dark room. His heart, a steady, unfeeling drum in his chest for weeks, began to beat with a quiet, tense energy. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about the art of the challenge, the pure, intellectual thrill of it all. He was in his element. A phantom gliding through the wires, a ghost returning to its old home. After hours of methodical scanning, he found it. A single, misconfigured server, still running the old Phoenix Tech authentication protocol. It was a single tiny open window in a 1,000-story skyscraper. He felt a jolt of grim satisfaction. His theory was correct. They had been careless. They had seen his creation not as a masterpiece of engineering, but as a commodity. And in doing so, they had overlooked its most critical flaw, a flaw only its creator could exploit. He didn't try to break through the main network. That would be too obvious. Instead, he used the tiny vulnerability to create a shadow entry, a back door that was not just hidden, but was completely silent. He wrote a few lines of code, an elegant little script that would hide itself in a series of routine system log files, disguising itself as harmless telemetry data. It was an invisible key, a silent mole, and it would give him access to the network without ever raising a single red flag. He watched the script execute, his hands trembling slightly, the only outward sign of the profound tension he was feeling. The process took only a few seconds, but to Mark, it felt like an eternity. Then, a single line of text appeared on the screen. Access granted. He felt a rush of adrenaline, a powerful surge of energy he hadn't felt since the betrayal. He was in files. His target, his betrayer, was right there, within his reach. He didn't download anything, not yet. This was just the first move in a very long game. He logged out, his shadow entry remaining behind, a tiny, undetectable worm waiting for his command. He closed his laptop, the screen going dark. In the silence of his apartment, Mark leaned back against the wall, the tension leaving his body in a single heavy sigh. He had been a prisoner for 6 months, a ghost in his own life. But now he was a ghost in theirs. The quiet war had begun, and the first shot had been fired. Stemmed the web of lies. The quiet hum of the server had become the new rhythm of Mark's life. Days bled into nights in a silent, solitary pursuit. His apartment, once a monument to apathy, was now a digital war room. He sat hunched over his makeshift desk, the glow of the dual monitors illuminating his grimly focused face. His shadow entry into Omnicorp's network was still a complete secret, a silent ghost in their machine, and he was using that stealth to its fullest advantage. He wasn't interested in the company's public-facing files. He was a digital forensic architect, and he was hunting for buried secrets. He used his back door to meticulously sift through the deep-layer archives and encrypted storage of Jason Harris's personal and corporate directories. He moved with a quiet, confident precision, no different from the way he used to navigate the command lines of the Phoenix OS. He knew how someone like Jason, a man who lived in the public eye, would hide his digital sins. They wouldn't be in an obvious folder named Incriminating Evidence. They would be nested in innocuous-sounding subdirectories, disguised as routine data or archived project files. His search was a slow, methodical process, a digital deep-sea dive. For hours he found nothing but the mundane detritus of a busy executive's life. Expense reports, meeting minutes, and corporate emails filled with empty jargon. The monotony was a test, a deliberate distraction. But Mark held firm, his patience as unbreakable as the code he—
The book immediately spotted the discrepancies. This wasn't a standard quarterly report. It was a meticulously falsified one, with inflated revenue numbers and deliberately understated liabilities. The dates on the spreadsheet corresponded to the quarter immediately preceding the Omnicorp acquisition. Jason had cooked the books, manipulating the numbers to make Phoenix Tech look far more profitable than it actually was. Mark felt a chilling sense of vindication. It wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a criminal act of corporate fraud. He continued to dig, and the picture grew even darker. He found emails to a financial advisor detailing the process of setting up offshore accounts and shell companies to hide money. The tax fraud wasn't an accident. It was a well-thought-out, long-term scheme. As he sifted through the evidence, downloading and encrypting each file into a secure directory within his dark archive, something shifted inside of Mark. The rage that had once been a white-hot furnace was now a cold, solid block of ice. The pain of the betrayal had been replaced by a grim, professional certainty. The Jason he had known, the friend he had trusted, was a fiction. The man he was now investigating was a cold, calculating criminal, a web of lies and deceit wrapped in a charming facade. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. Jason hadn't just sold him out. He had sold out every employee who had poured their lives into Phoenix Tech, every investor who believed in the company's mission, every user who trusted their data. The entire triumph of Phoenix 2.0 had been built on a foundation of rot. Mark meticulously organized the files, a spreadsheet for the falsified reports, a separate folder for the encrypted emails, another for the correspondence with the offshore accountant. He added timestamps and digital signatures, cross-referencing everything. He wasn't just gathering evidence. He was building a legal case so watertight, so undeniable, that no high-priced lawyer or corporate PR machine could ever dismantle it. This wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about serving justice on his own terms. He finished his work for the night, the screen of his monitor a testament to his chilling success. He sat in the dark, the apartment silent once more. The hunt was over, and the prey had been found. He knew that with the information he now possessed, Jason's empire,
arrogant and blind, was about to find himself on a chessboard where every move was Mark's. Mark sat at his desk, the only light in the apartment a cool blue glow from his monitors.
He pulled up his list of Jason's digital vulnerabilities, his personal email, his subscription accounts, his travel schedules, all meticulously documented from the data he'd pulled. He felt no anger, only a clinical focus, the detached precision of a surgeon. The first move was small, almost petty, a pinprick. He found Jason's account for his bespoke car service, the one he used to ferry himself to and from meetings in a black-on-black town car. With a few keystrokes, Mark canceled the weekly service. Then, he signed Jason up for a deluge of junk mail from dozens of luxury car dealerships, flooding his inbox with automated emails for test drives and financing offers. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jason, the man who had stolen his company, would now have to deal with the mundane frustration of spam, a problem so small it was beneath his notice, yet one that would slowly, maddeningly compound. A few days later, Mark escalated. He found a private jet reservation for a weekend getaway Jason had planned with his wife to Cabo. Using a compromised account, he changed the flight time from early morning to late at night. He imagined Jason arriving at the private terminal, his face a mask of annoyance, only to be told he'd missed his flight by 12 hours. He envisioned the look on his wife's face, the hushed argument, the public humiliation. It was a perfectly crafted piece of minor sabotage, a flaw in the system of a man who believed his life was infallible. The scene shifted. Halfway across the city, Jason paced his gleaming penthouse, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "What do you mean the reservation's canceled? I booked it a month ago. Are you telling me I've got to fly commercial? Do you know who I am?" He barked at his assistant, who held the phone away from her ear, her face pale. The small annoyances had been piling up. His smart fridge had ordered 20 gallons of milk. The private chef for his dinner party had mysteriously been canceled. His golf tee time had been changed to 3 in the morning. Each incident was a tiny, illogical hiccup in his meticulously planned life, a flaw that he couldn't understand or fix. He lashed out at his staff. Unstable. His next moves were even more calculated. He targeted Jason's pride. He used a fake email address to write a devastating, anonymous review of a high-end restaurant Jason had just invested in. He praised the decor, but tore apart the service and the food. His review so specific and cutting that it would feel real to anyone who read it. The review, a single drop of poison in a well of praise, would be just enough to make Jason paranoid. But the final move of the week was the one that would truly set the trap. Mark used a series of burner accounts to enter a private investment forum frequented by Phoenix Tech board members and investors, the very people who had celebrated Jason's takeover. He posted a cryptic message in a thread about the company's recent performance. "A little bird told me some of Phoenix Tech's numbers are a little too good to be true. Maybe check the historical data, specifically Q3 of last year. Just a thought." The message was vague, an easily dismissed rumor, but for a few key investors it would be a seed of doubt, a whisper in the back of their minds. It was a digital breadcrumb, a small piece of the truth designed to make them question everything. Mark watched as the message was buried by new posts. He deleted his temporary accounts and shut down his system, the silence of his apartment once again broken only by the hum of the server. He knew Jason was out there, probably in a rage, yelling at his assistant over another canceled reservation. But soon he wouldn't be yelling about inconveniences. He would be yelling about the small whispers of truth Mark was about to unleash. The pieces were in motion, and the game had just begun. The digital torment had worked. Mark could feel it in the shifting currents of the corporate world. Jason's public persona, once an unshakable pillar of confidence, was beginning to show cracks. The petty annoyances were piling up, making him irritable and paranoid. The anonymous whispers in private forums were sowing seeds of doubt. The battlefield was ready,
and it was time for the next, most crucial phase. Mark could not bring down an empire from expose the falsified data of a corrupt tech CEO. She worked with facts, not conjecture. She was the perfect choice because she wouldn't trust a source. She would only trust the data. Mark began the process of communication. It was a painstaking, multi-layered operation. He couldn't risk a direct email or a phone call. Instead, he crafted a single encrypted file, not a virus, not a leak, but a locked box containing a small piece of undeniable truth. He set up a temporary, untraceable email address, routed through a series of Tor relays that would bounce the message through a dozen different countries before it landed in her anonymous tip line. He knew she checked it religiously. A digital bottle in the ocean she never expected to find anything in. The file contained a single piece of evidence from his dark archive, an unassailable data point that would be impossible to dismiss. It was a spreadsheet, line from Phoenix Tech's Q3 earnings report showing a specific revenue figure. Alongside it, he attached a link to the official, publicly filed version of the same report. The numbers didn't match. The difference was small, a seemingly minor discrepancy of a few $1,000,000, but to a seasoned journalist, a single falsified line in a financial report was not an error, it was a lie, and the single lie could unravel an entire story. The scene shifted, a new window opening onto a different world. Sarah Chen sat in her cramped office, a graveyard of empty coffee cups and stacks of paper. She was sifting through her anonymous tip line, a daily ritual that almost always yielded nothing but angry rants and conspiracy theories. Then she saw it, an email with no subject, no body text, just a single encrypted attachment. Her instincts, honed by years of sifting through garbage, told her this was different. The encryption alone was a red flag. It was high level, a kind of digital fortress that only a professional would use. She ran a scan for malware and viruses. It was clean. She opened the attachment. The contents of the file, a jumbled mess of text until she entered a simple password provided in the file's metadata. The text unraveled, and she saw the two numbers side by side. Sarah's skepticism warred with her professional curiosity. It could be a simple mistake, a typo, but a multi-million-dollar typo? Scoop. This was a journalistic pursuit of the highest order. She was now a player in a game she hadn't known was being played. Back in his apartment, Mark watched the news feeds. He saw a brief report about Sarah Chen's team postponing a planned story on a political scandal, refocusing their efforts on an unnamed corporate investigation. The move was a tiny ripple in the ocean of daily news, but to Mark, it was a tidal wave. He knew she had taken the bait. The message had been delivered. The messenger had been engaged. The game was no longer being played in the dark. It was about to go public. He had just passed the truth to the one person who would not only believe it, but who would also fight for it. Leak, panic, was a cold, unfamiliar visitor in Jason Harris's perfectly curated life. It arrived in the form of a phone call from Omnicorp's chief legal officer, a man whose voice was usually as unruffled as a still lake. He wanted to know why a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, a woman named Sarah Chen, was asking pointed questions about a minor discrepancy in Phoenix Tech's Q3 financial report. Jason stood in the middle of his penthouse living room, the panoramic view of the city now just a blurry smear of light. His face was hot, his mind a frantic scramble. A discrepancy? What are you talking about? It must be an error, a typo. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. They get things wrong all the time. The lawyer's voice was as sharp as a scalpel. Ms. Chen doesn't make typos. And the number she's asking about is a key revenue figure, Mr. Harris. She's claiming to have a copy of the pre-acquisition report that doesn't match the public filing. Do you have any idea how she got it? Jason's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew. He knew exactly what she was talking about. He had personally overseen the fabrication of those numbers, inflating them to justify the acquisition price. But he couldn't admit that. He couldn't even hint at it. The small private acts of sabotage that had been making him paranoid for weeks now made a terrifying kind, demanding loyalty and subtly accusing them of being spies. His paranoia was a palpable thing, a shadow that followed him everywhere. He wasn't sleeping. He was drinking. His wife, who had grown accustomed to his sporadic fits of rage, was now giving him a wide berth. The perfect life he had built was a house of cards, and now a single determined journalist was blowing on it. Back in his own quiet apartment, Mark watched it all with a cold, detached satisfaction. He saw the news report about the company's internal review. He saw Jason's face, pale and strained, in a candid photo from a press briefing. The corporate statement was a perfect lie, full of empty reassurances and vague promises. Mark knew that to a seasoned journalist, this was not a denial. It was a confession. They were panicking. It was time for the next move. He opened his dark archive and found the folder with the encrypted emails. He selected a few key exchanges between Jason and his offshore accountant, brief, damning conversations about adjusting the quarterly figures and cleansing the data. The language was guarded, but the intent was unmistakable. He carefully bundled the files, added a layer of encryption, and sent them to Sarah Chen's anonymous tip line, a second breadcrumb in a trail that now led directly to Jason's front door. A day later, the news hit like a thunderclap. Sarah Chen's story, a masterpiece of journalistic restraint and lethal implication, was published online. The headline was sober, but the content was incendiary. Sources question integrity of Phoenix Tech acquisition, citing financial discrepancies. The article didn't outright accuse Jason of fraud, but it raised serious, verifiable questions about the financial reports he had signed off on. It included a direct quote from a leaked document that directly contradicted the official SEC filing. The ripple effect was immediate. Mark watched as Omnicorp's stock price, a bastion of corporate stability, took a small but noticeable dip. The news was everywhere, on financial networks, on tech blogs, and in rising chorus of disbelief. The story, once a rumor, was now a fact, a devastating, irrefutable truth. In his apartment, Mark watched it all on his screen, a silent conductor to a symphony of chaos. The final act was just a few clicks of his mouse. He had taken his complete dark archive, the falsified reports, the encrypted emails, the tax evasion schematics, all cross-referenced and verified, and sent it to Sarah Chen, with a simultaneous anonymous tip to the SEC and the FBI. He had passed the torch and then vanished, a ghost in the machine. He was no longer the architect of vengeance. He was a spectator to justice. He sat back, the only sound the low hum of his server and the frantic blare of the news reports. He saw the face of an analyst on a major network, holding up a screenshot of one of the documents he had leaked. "This is not a discrepancy," the analyst said, his voice grave. "This is a deliberate, systematic fabrication. This is criminal fraud." Meanwhile, across town, Jason Harris's perfectly constructed life was coming apart at the seams. He was in a high-stakes, internal strategy meeting with Omnicorp's board members, a group of powerful men and women accustomed to control. His phone buzzed, but he ignored it. Then, the phones of everyone else in the room began to vibrate and ring, a chorus of digital alarms. A senior vice president's face went white as he read an urgent text. Another board member audibly gasped. The mood in the room shifted from quiet discussion to abject panic. Jason's stomach twisted into a cold knot. He knew. He didn't need to be told. The silence was louder than any noise. Finally, the CEO, a man who had never raised his voice, looked at Jason with a chilling, dead-eyed stare. He slowly slid his own phone across the table. The headline on the screen was a single brutal sentence that would haunt Jason for the rest of his life. Phoenix Tech founder Jason Harris indicted. Jason felt the world tilt. His voice was a pathetic croak. That's a lie. It's a smear campaign. You can't believe that. He looked captured every detail. The cold steel of the handcuffs, the defeated slump of his shoulders, the broken look in his eyes. Mark watched it all on his television screen. He saw the handcuffs. He saw the police car. He saw Jason being led away. He felt the weight of it. The terrible finality of the moment, the justice he had so meticulously sought, had been served. The poison of betrayal that had consumed his life had been purged. He sat in the silence of his apartment, the screen still flickering with the headlines of Jason's downfall. The work was done. The victory was complete. But there was no joy, no sense of triumph. Only a profound aching emptiness. He had won the war, but in doing so, he had burned the entire world he had ever known to the ground. Quiet reflection. The sound was a distant hum, a faint chorus of sirens and shouting that filtered up from the streets below. But in Mark's apartment, there was only a profound and terrifying silence. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, the television screen before him a silent, flickering window into the chaos he had unleashed. The news was on a continuous loop, a surreal looping montage of his vengeance. Jason Harris, face pale and broken, being led away in handcuffs. A grim-faced analyst explaining the collapse of Omnicorp stock. The sterile, dispassionate tone of the anchor confirming the federal investigation. The victory, so meticulously planned and executed, was here. Yet Mark felt nothing. He had spent 6 months driven by a single purpose, a singular, cold fury that had consumed his every waking hour. He had been a ghost, a shadow, a silent architect of ruin. He had believed that when the moment came, when the empire built on lies finally crumbled, he would feel a surge of satisfaction, a wave of vindication that would wash away the pain of the betrayal. But there was nothing. The feeling was not one of triumph, but of profound, aching emptiness. He had won, but the prize was a hollow one. The man on the screen, a defeated, back his innocence, his faith in friendship, his ability to trust? No, it had done nothing but fill the void with a new kind of emptiness. He had traded one form of pain for another. He had become a different person. The anger that had fueled him had left a permanent scar, a cold detachment that now prevented him from feeling anything at all. He had sacrificed his own happiness for this one act of justice, and now that it was over, he had nowhere to go. He had no one to share his victory with, no one to celebrate with, no one to even tell his story to. He was alone, a ghost who had finally finished his haunting. Mark walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights were beautiful, but he saw them not as a vibrant collection of life, but as a vast, impersonal grid of data, of energy, of potential. He was a master of that grid, a force that could destroy empires from a single room. But what now? The single, all-consuming purpose that had defined his last 6 months was gone. The grand narrative of his revenge had a mundane, quiet conclusion. He was free from the injustice, but he was also free-falling without a purpose. A man who had won the game but had no idea what to do with his victory. Compartments. Mark woke with the sun streaming through his window, a soft, golden light that was entirely unfamiliar. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the weight was gone. The silence in his apartment was not the oppressive quiet of his despair or the chilling stillness of his work. It was the peaceful quiet of a mind at rest. The revenge, a consuming fire that had burned away 6 months of his life, was over. The ashes had settled, and in the stillness, he felt a profound, new kind of clarity. He got up and walked to his desk. His dark archive, a fortress of incriminating data, sat waiting on his external drive. He opened the file, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He could keep it, a trophy of his victory, a reminder of what he had achieved. But he didn't need it. The memory, large anonymous bin, a final farewell to the tools that had defined his darkest purpose. As he walked away, he didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The next few weeks were a quiet, methodical process of rebuilding. He found a new apartment in a different neighborhood, a small, simple space with large windows that let in plenty of light. He bought a new laptop, a standard, off-the-shelf model, no different from anyone else's. He was starting over, not from a place of defeat, but from a place of clarity. Then he sat down at his new desk with his new clean computer, and he started to code. This time the purpose was different. It wasn't about tearing down, it was about building. He was creating a new software tool, an early warning system for small businesses, designed to scan for suspicious financial activity and predatory corporate interest. It was a digital shield, a way to protect others from the very kind of betrayal he had suffered. The idea was born from his pain, but it was forged in his newfound peace. He worked for hours, the familiar rhythm of the keyboard a comforting, creative pulse. As the lines of code filled his screen, he looked at his reflection in a glass. He saw a man who was no longer a victim, no longer a ghost, and no longer an avenger. He wasn't a hero. He was just Mark, a man who had been broken by injustice but had found a way to use the pieces of his shattered life to build something new, something meaningful. The revenge had been a necessary detour, a way to reclaim his dignity from a thief, but the true victory wasn't in Jason's ruin. It was in his own rebirth, his final quiet escape from the darkness. He had won the war, and now, finally, he was ready to live in the peace he had earned.